5,000 feet above the bocage country of Normandy, the morning haze shimmered with the heat of August. Below, the French hedgerows formed a quilt of greens and browns, stitched together by narrow dirt lanes and stone farm walls. The war looked almost peaceful from up here almost, but the pilots of the 404th Fighter Group knew better. Captain Charles Pete Mohr squinted against the glare bouncing off his canopy. The sun was behind them, the wind humming through the gaps of the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt's frame. He rolled his shoulders once to ease the stiffness. 3 days of relentless sorties had worn everyone thin. The air smelled faintly of oil and cordite, even up here, a metallic perfume that had become the scent of their campaign. Control to Viper 1. Armour sighted north of Mortain. Repeat, German armour massing north of Mortain. Coordinates incoming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mohr's headphones crackled with static as the forward air controller relayed the target grid. He scribbled the numbers on the side of his kneeboard map, drawing a quick line with his gloved thumb to orient himself. Below the haze, the *** German counterattack Operation Lüttich ** was unfolding, an act of desperation ordered straight from Hitler himself. The Allies' breakout at St. Lo had shattered the front, and now the Wehrmacht was clawing back toward Avranches, trying to cut off Patton's spearhead before it could encircle them. Mohr keyed his mic. Copy, control. Viper flight turning south to intercept. He tipped his stick, and the P-47 rolled gracefully to the right. One by one, his wingmen followed, their silver fuselages flashing like coins tossed into sunlight. The formation tightened into a shallow dive, the distant hum swelling into a thunderous chord. The Thunderbolt was no beauty queen, she was a brute, a flying anvil with wings, but she could dive like a stone and carry enough ordnance to flatten a village. Beneath Mohr's wings hung 10 5-inch HVARs high-velocity aircraft rockets and a pair of 500-pound bombs, each marked with stenciled serials and dull yellow stripes. The load made the controls heavy, but the big Pratt & Whitney engine didn't mind. It roared like something alive. Viper 2, check your spacing. Mohr's voice was calm, professional, almost casual. Roger that, lead. Holding tight. Through the plexiglass canopy, the Normandy countryside began to rise, the neat fields twisting into forested ridges and shadowed valleys. Columns of smoke marked where previous sorties had struck supply convoys. Roads glinted faintly with movement half-tracks, trucks, and somewhere in that sprawl, the dark shapes of tanks. Mohr levelled out briefly at 3,000 feet. The altimeter ticked down as he studied the ground through his gun sight. To his left, another flight of Thunderbolts peeled off, heading toward Mortain's western flank. The radio buzzed with overlapping chatter, calls for targets, coordinates, confirmations, screams, static, and silence. There. He spotted it at last, a long hedge-lined road cutting east to west, crawling with shapes, tanks, and not small ones. He counted 3 Jagdpanzer 4s, their flat casemate armour catching the sun as they manoeuvred into firing positions. Behind them, panzer grenadiers moved like ants around their machines. Targets confirmed, range 1 mile, prepare for attack run. He pushed the throttle forward. The P-47 responded instantly, nose dropping as the airspeed climbed past 250, 280, 300 miles per hour. The sound shifted from a steady drone to a banshee's wail. He could feel the air pressure mounting on the control surfaces, the vibration running up through the seat and into his spine. Below, the tank crews had no idea death was falling toward them. The low clouds masked the incoming formation until it was too late. Viper flight arm rockets. Check safeties off. Targets at road intersection, north of hedgerow line. Altitude, 1,000. A click of switches. 2 armed, 3 armed, 4 armed. The earth was rushing up now. Mohr aligned his sight reticle on the lead tank, the crosshairs bobbing with every buffeting gust. Sweat trickled under his oxygen mask. His hand tightened around the trigger. He could almost see the German crew, unaware, heads craning out of open hatches. 45 seconds. That's all the tanks would have between discovery and obliteration. Viper flight release on my mark, rockets only. Save bombs for second pass. Roger, lead. Standing by. The sky above Mortain screamed. In the hedgerow shadows, Krause's Jagdpanzer 4 idled quietly, its Maybach engine rumbling through the earth. The smell of oil and exhaust mingled with the damp scent of crushed grass. The crew, 5 men in sweat-stained field uniforms, waited for orders that hadn't yet come. The radio hissed with half-heard voices, interference, and static. Panzer columns moving to Mortain Road Junction, the loader muttered, reading a scratchy transmission from command. We hold here until 10. Krause nodded absently. The counterattack had gone poorly since dawn. Allied artillery had cut the main road to Avranches, and reports spoke of American armor pushing east. But the order was the order. Hold. Wait. Attack when told. He adjusted his binoculars. The landscape ahead shimmered with heat, a patchwork of orchards, fields, and stone barns. Somewhere beyond that ridge, American tanks were said to be moving north. His crew had been fighting for years, from the steppes of Ukraine to the hedgerows of France, and they all felt the same thing now. The war was slipping from their hands. The loader yawned. Quiet morning, Herr Feldwebel. Too quiet, Krause said. Then something flashed at the base of the cell, edge of the sky. A glint, faint but unmistakable, slicing through the sunlight like a thrown mirror. Another flash, then more. Flieger! The loader frowned, rising slightly to see through the hatch. Krause lowered his binoculars and froze. There, high above the horizon, came a formation of dots, growing larger by the second. Wings spread wide, engines roaring faintly against the wind. They were diving, fast. Flieger! Flieger! The shout tore through the calm like an alarm bell. The crew sprang into motion, boots clanging against steel. The gunner cursed, slamming the hatch shut. The driver threw the gear into reverse, but the heavy machine moved sluggishly, treads grinding against the dirt as it backed toward the tree line. Too late. The first Thunderbolt broke through the low clouds like a hawk stooping on prey. Sunlight flared off its wings, the red nose spinning with its propeller. Krause barely had time to duck before the world erupted in sound, a shrieking roar like tearing metal and thunder together. The Jagdpanzer shook violently as the rockets hit the ground nearby, twin explosions flinging dirt and branches high into the air. The impact slammed Krause's head against the periscope rim. He tasted blood. Gott, I am Himmel! The loader screamed. Smoke filled the fighting compartment, acrid and choking. The driver kept backing up, grinding gears. Outside, another explosion. A tree shattered into splinters, showering the armor with leaves and debris. Above, Captain Mohr rolled inverted, lining up his next pass. The HVARs under his wings locked into their rails. Through his gun sight, he could see the grey outline of Krause's tank, its top hatch open just enough to show movement inside. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. 8 rockets leapt from the Thunderbolt's wings in quick succession, streaking down in white contrails. Each one carried a 45-pound warhead of high-explosive steel, capable of punching through 5 inches of armor at a 45-degree impact. The first rocket struck just short of the target, gouging a crater beside the hedgerow. The second hit home dead center on the Jagdpanzer's engine deck. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the tank's rear erupted in a burst of orange flame, the explosion muffled but final. The vehicle lurched once, smoke pouring from the vents. Inside, Krause's ears rang. The heat hit him like a wall. The loader was shouting something, but it came through as a distant echo. He reached for the hatch, his fingers blistering against the metal, and heaved it open. Fire licked along the rear compartment. The ammunition was cooking off. He dragged himself out, rolling off the hull just as the second internal explosion tore the machine apart. Pieces of armor clanged down around him. He hit the dirt, gasping, face streaked with soot. From above, Mohr pulled up hard, the G-forces pressing him into his seat. Through his rear canopy, he saw the fireball bloom, black smoke twisting upward like a flag. Another P-47 followed, releasing its bombs in a clean dive. The road became a cauldron of dust, flame, and twisted steel. The Jagdpanzers never heard the Thunderbolts approach. They never had a chance to. By the time the smoke cleared, the sky belonged to the Americans, and the German armour at Mortain was nothing but burning wreckage in a Normandy field. The first pair of HVAs streaked downward, twin spears of white fire carving contrails through the morning haze. For a heartbeat, they were silent, distant flashes that seemed almost beautiful against the calm Norman sky. Then came the sound, a tearing roar that shattered the air, like fabric ripped apart by thunder. Inside the lead Jagdpanzer IV, the crew heard the faint scream of rockets long before they saw the flashes. To them, it sounded like the sky itself was breaking. Oberfeldwebel Kraus's instincts told him to duck, but training forced him to act. "Reverse! Schnell!" he shouted, voice hoarse. The driver, half blinded by dust, threw the transmission into reverse. The machine shuddered, groaning as its treads clawed backward through churned earth. But it was too late. The first rocket struck 50 meters short, a geyser of dirt and shrapnel erupted before the vehicle. It was close enough to hammer the armor with a physical shock, like a sledgehammer against the hull. The crew froze for half a second, waiting for the next impact. The next came. Another rocket screamed down, followed by another. The pilot above Captain Charles Pete Mohr was firing in a walking pattern, his aim refined through months of combat experience. He was not guessing. He was painting a line of fire across the German position, one pair of rockets after another, adjusting his dive angle slightly each time. To Kraus, the sky seemed to open up into white streaks, each a promise of death. The third rocket found its mark. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It hit squarely on the upper glacis of the Jagdpanzer IV. The armor plate, 80 millimeters thick, disintegrated. Molten fragments ricocheted through the fighting compartment, slicing through flesh and steel alike. The gunner, still gripping the traverse wheel, died instantly, half of his head gone. The loader screamed, clutching a wound that no one could treat. The smell of burned insulation and cordite filled the air, thick and choking. Then came the ammunition cook-off. Inside the hull, the ready racks held 10 rounds of 75 millimeter shells, high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, volatile when struck by heat. The first shell detonated with a concussive blast that ripped through the crew compartment. The explosion didn't simply destroy the vehicle, it tore it apart from within. The 25-ton Jagdpanzer heaved sideways, lifted off the ground as if by an invisible hand. Outside, the blast wave flattened the nearby hedgerow. Dirt, leaves, and fragments of steel rained down. A burning piece of track landed 20 meters away, still spinning. The second Jagdpanzer, positioned a few meters behind, tried to move forward into cover. Its driver gunned the engine, but the treads only dug deeper into the mud. Kraus's surviving crewmen, their uniforms smouldering, crawled out from the wreck, half blind, dragging a wounded man whose legs no longer existed. Above, Mohr pulled up hard on the stick. His Thunderbolt screamed upward, wings trembling under G-force. He levelled out, banking left to observe his strike. Through the canopy, he saw the hedge line burning, one Jagdpanzer engulfed in smoke, another trying to reverse into a ditch. He toggled the release switch for his second salvo. 4 more HVARs dropped away from the wings. Their exhaust plumes lit up the sky like the tails of comets. They struck the second Jagdpanzer in 2 separate impacts, one on the rear deck, the other glancing off the side armor and detonating on the ground nearby. The explosion ignited the fuel tanks. The vehicle turned into a pillar of fire. The last Jagdpanzer, at the far end of the ambush line, managed to back into the tree line, but a near miss from the final pair of rockets tore through its camouflage net, shredding branches and sending burning debris raining down onto its engine deck. In less than 60 seconds, 3 tanks, each a masterpiece of German engineering, feared for their precision, were reduced to smouldering hulks. Inside that single minute, time seemed to lose meaning. For Krauss, it was no longer combat, it was survival in the face of a power he could not touch. He lay face down in the mud, the air thick with heat and ash, his ears ringing. The once solid steel fortress around him had become a coffin of twisted metal. The 45 seconds had felt eternal, drawn out into an agony of noise and shock and disbelief. When silence finally came, it was worse than the explosions. The forest echoed with small fires crackling, ammunition cooking off, and the distant buzz of flies already gathering. Above the chaos, Mohr's P-47 rolled away into the sunlight. His voice came through the radio calmly. Targets neutralized, no movement. Returning to base. On the ground, Krauss's survivors crawled into a drainage ditch, leaving behind the smoking carcasses of their machines. Of 12 men, only 7 still breathed and none unscathed. 45 seconds had erased an entire platoon. For the German Panzerjäger men trained to stalk armor with precision and patience, the battle at Mortain shattered everything they believed about war. Their doctrine, their confidence, even their sense of control, all obliterated in less than a minute by aircraft that appeared, struck, and vanished like gods of thunder. For years, the Wehrmacht's armoured hunters had held an edge. Their 75mm and 88mm guns had earned them respect, even fear, among Allied tankers. They had names whispered like curses: Nashorn, Jagdpanzer, Jagdpanzer IV. These were machines that killed from ambush, unseen until the moment they fired. But at Mortain, that mastery meant nothing. Their guns could still destroy a Sherman at 1,000 meters, yet no amount of skill could hit a Thunderbolt hurtling overhead at 300 miles per hour. The battlefield had simply outgrown them. The reports that came back from the front were grim and poetic in their despair. Field diaries described the experience as Blitz von oben, lightning from above. Tank hunters, who once took pride in their calm under fire, now flinched at the sound of an approaching aircraft. By the second day of Operation Lüttich, the reality had set in. Movement by daylight was suicide. German tank units began hiding under trees, covering their vehicles with nets, straw, even wet leaves. Crews lived underground, sleeping in cellars, maintaining their tanks only at night. But even darkness offered little comfort. Allied reconnaissance aircraft flew almost continuously, guiding P-47 strike groups to any sign of German armor. One careless spark, one engine left running too long, could invite instant destruction. Between August 7th and 11th, 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt proved its dominance beyond any question. Flying more than 1,200 sorties, the American pilots devastated German armor columns around Mortain. Over 400 vehicles were destroyed or rendered useless: tanks, half-tracks, and self-propelled guns. Among them were over 90 Jagdpanzers and Panthers, once the pride of Hitler's armoured divisions. The Luftwaffe was powerless to respond. With its fuel reserves exhausted and its pilots scattered, German fighters were almost absent from the skies. In their place came a new sound, the relentless, confident growl of radial engines bearing white stars. For the tank hunters below, this was more than defeat. It was humiliation. They were craftsmen of precision gunnery soldiers who measured their worth by marksmanship and tactical cunning. But now they faced an enemy who did not duel, who simply appeared, struck, and vanished. The P-47's rockets could miss by meters and still kill. The blast alone could flip a vehicle, collapse a trench, or detonate nearby ammunition. Crews began to describe the shockwave of near misses as the hammer of God. One soldier wrote in his diary, "We are no longer fighting the Americans. We are fighting the sky." It wasn't just technology, it was psychology. The mere shadow of an aircraft passing overhead could scatter entire units. Commanders were forced to order camouflage drills daily, teaching men to freeze motionless the moment they heard an engine. But nothing could hide heat. The Thunderbolt pilots, equipped with improved radio coordination and sometimes guided by forward air controllers, learned to spot tank exhaust and dust trails from miles away. The result was total dominance. By the end of the Mortain counterattack, German Panzerjäger units had been reduced to fragments. What few vehicles remained operational were abandoned or captured. Those who survived would later recount that their greatest enemy was not the Sherman, nor the infantry, but the sky itself. American reports after the battle credited air power as the decisive factor. Generals began calling the P-47 the armor killer. Its 10 HVAR rockets, each capable of piercing 5 inches of armor, turned a single fighter bomber into the equivalent of a flying anti-tank battery. For the Wehrmacht, the lesson was clear and bitter. The age of the tank hunter was ending. The vertical battlefield had arrived. In that new dimension of warfare, no amount of steel or doctrine could save them. They had once been predators. Now they were prey. Each 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rocket, HVAR, left its launch rail at 1,375 feet per second, a blur of smoke and fire that cut through the morning sky like a thrown spear. The weapon itself was crude in appearance, just a steel tube with fins, but its simplicity concealed brutal efficiency. Inside, a 45-pound warhead packed with Composition B explosive travelled with the kinetic energy of nearly 1 million joules, enough to drive molten fragments through 5 inches of rolled armour plate. When it struck, there was no cinematic explosion, just a flash, a shudder, and the sudden, ugly disassembly of matter. Armour cracked, fuel ignited. Men disappeared into the geometry of destruction. From the air, it looked clinical. From the ground, it was hell. The Jagdpanzers had learned to fear the shriek. It was a sound unlike artillery or small arms, an unbroken, rising scream that tore the air apart. When the first rockets struck the hedgerow line, every crew in the German sector instinctively abandoned their periscopes and ducked into the hull. Men pressed their faces into the steel floor, teeth clenched, ears ringing. The tanks trembled as if struck by invisible hammers. For a moment after the impacts, silence. Then came the rain of earth, branches, and shattered armour falling like shrapnel from heaven. From the tree line, Oberfeldwebel-Kraus watched a half-track vanish in a gout of flame. The vehicle flipped sideways as if swatted by a giant hand. Its cargo infantrymen, ammunition boxes, spare fuel drums scattered across the ditch in pieces too small to recognize. The air reeked of cordite and burning rubber. The driver of a nearby Panzer IV slammed his hatch shut and gunned the engine, desperate to move anywhere that wasn't here. But there was nowhere left to hide. The Germans had adapted as best they could. They strung camouflage nets over their hulls, draped branches across gun barrels, and parked beneath apple orchards. They tried smoke screens and rapid redeployment, darting from cover to cover between air raids. None of it mattered. The American airmen had new tools technology that turned guessing into calculation. The K-14 gyroscopic gun sight was one of them. It was a marvel of mid-century engineering, a self-stabilizing system that predicted where a moving target would be, not where it was. The pilot simply kept the enemy in his sight ring, and the mechanism did the rest, compensating for lead, angle, and gravity drop. With it, even the chaos of a dive became a mathematical certainty. Paired with forward air controllers on the ground, often riding in jeeps or tanks with radio contact, the P-47's were now guided with surgical precision. A forward observer would mark the target armour column, hedgerow junction, 200 metres north of Orchard, and within minutes the sky would darken with approaching aircraft. The Thunderbolts came in pairs or quartets, always from the Sunday. Their radial engines growled like thunder rolling across the valley. To the German crews, the sound was unmistakable and paralysing. A man could not fight the sky. Captain Pete Mohr remembered the early months of 1944, when tank busting was still improvisation. Back then, pilots relied on eyesight and instinct, diving until tracer fire blurred the canopy and pulling up by feel alone. But now, in the heat of August, it was procedure. Science. The coordination between air and ground had matured into an art form. Allied intelligence had mapped every likely German route, every road capable of bearing armour weight. The skies over Normandy had become a grid of death zones. From 5,000 feet, Mohr could see the telltale plumes of exhaust curling from Jagdpanzers moving between hedgerows. Even at that distance, the dark smoke betrayed them, an unintentional signal flare pointing to their doom. The gyroscopic sight danced steadily as he adjusted his rudder, his thumb resting lightly on the firing switch. Viper 1 to control, visual on armor. 3 Jagdpanzers, moving east on D Road, beginning run. Roger, Viper 1, you're cleared hot. He pressed the trigger. 8 rockets leapt from his wings, white streaks in perfect symmetry. They fell like lightning. Below, Krauss's radio operator shouted and pointed, "Raketen! Raketen!" But the sound drowned beneath the thunderclap of impacts. A wall of earth lifted skyward, and when it settled, the next hedgerow was gone. Trees lay in fragments. The second Jagdpanzer was burning, the flames licking through the vents as ammunition cooked off. The Americans called the HVAR the Holy Moses. To the men on the receiving end, it was more like the wrath of God. Its effect went beyond destruction, it unmade confidence. Crews abandoned their vehicles at the first sign of aircraft. Supply convoys scattered, columns halted in ditches, and entire battalions hid beneath bridges until dusk. Each rocket was a statement. The sky ruled now. Even a near miss was lethal. The 5-inch warhead created a blast radius of over 30 meters, enough to tear apart infantry and cripple lightly armored vehicles. For open-topped tank, destroyers and self-propelled guns, the shockwave alone could flip them like toys. Soldiers learned to dive under their machines for shelter, but that only meant dying beneath them when the explosion rolled them over. The battlefield, once governed by steel and optics, had been rewritten by energy and speed. By late afternoon, the hedgerow lines north of Mortain were smoking ruins. Craters pocked the lanes like open wounds. The survivors of the 2nd Panzer Division crawled from their wrecks, dazed, blackened, deafened. Where 30 tanks had stood, 5 remained mobile. The rest were silent, their tracks twisted, their guns bent skyward as if pleading to a god that no longer answered. At the edge of the battlefield, Captain Mohr circled one last time before heading home. Below him, the wreckage looked almost abstract geometric shapes, scattered across green fields. He felt no triumph, only the strange emptiness that came after perfect execution. He knew the physics, he understood the equations, but no numbers could account for the smell of burning fuel or the sight of men running from machines they once trusted. War had become a science, and he, unwillingly, its technician. For 2 decades, the German doctrine of Panzerjäger tank hunters had been one of precision and patience. It was an engineer's philosophy, born from experience in Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. Tanks were expensive, slow to build, and few in number. But a well-placed ambush, a single gun with skill and discipline, could stop a column cold. The Jagdpanzer IV, the latest descendant of that idea, embodied perfection in steel, low silhouette, thick sloped armor, and the long-barreled 75mm pack 42 liters divided by 70 gun that could kill a Sherman at over 1,000 meters. On paper, it was invincible, but war no longer fit on paper. By mid-1944, everything that doctrine depended upon concealment, range, geometry had dissolved beneath a new dimension. The battlefield had expanded vertically. The horizon, once the limit of a gunner's world, no longer mattered. Death came from above, from an angle no armor plate could deflect and no gun could answer. German manuals still taught the geometry of ambush. Position behind cover, wait for the enemy to expose his flank, fire, relocate. But now, the first warning of danger came not from a tank's engine or the crunch of treads, but from the sudden shadow of wings passing overhead. The Jagdpanzer crews tried to apply the old lessons. They picked fields of fire, aligned their guns with patient precision. But when the air filled with the howl of rockets, the mathematics of ground combat ceased to matter. Historians would later call it the collapse of doctrine, but in August 1944 it felt more like betrayal by the universe. Krause had spent years mastering his craft, estimating range by sight, compensating for wind and slope, memorizing the minute timing between the trigger pull and the shell's impact. That knowledge had kept him alive from Kursk to Caen, yet here, near Mortain, it was useless. No amount of training could fight physics that fell from the sky at 300 miles per hour. He crouched beside the wreckage of his tank, staring at the twisted gun barrel that pointed helplessly upward. Around him, the air shimmered with heat. His loader sat nearby, face blank, repeating the same phrase under his breath. Sie kamen aus dem Himmel, they came from the sky. The Panzerjäger ideal had been born in the crucible of necessity, a doctrine designed to stretch resources and precision against superior numbers. It had worked once. The ambush at Villers Bocage, the defence of Kharkov, the counterattacks in the Ardennes, all had drawn on the same logic: invisibility, marksmanship, and timing. But none of those virtues survived air superiority. The Americans had rewritten the rules. Every column of smoke, every glint of armor plate, every movement across open ground invited annihilation. Allied reconnaissance, aircraft mapped German positions daily. Ground controllers painted them with radio coordinates. Fighter bombers executed those coordinates with mechanical precision. What had once been a chess match between tanks became target practice from altitude. The German doctrine had no counter to the vertical battlefield. They had built for precision. Their enemies had built for dominance. In the days that followed, the survivors of the 2nd Panzer Division tried to regroup. Reports spoke of shattered communication lines, vehicles abandoned for lack of fuel, and entire platoons lost not to enemy tanks but to the sky itself. Officers argued over tactics, some demanded night movements, others camouflage or deception. None of it slowed the inevitable. "The Americans don't fight us anymore," one lieutenant said bitterly. "They exterminate us." By late August, the fields of Normandy were strewn with the evidence of a doctrine's death. Burned-out Jagdpanzers rested beside roads they were meant to defend, their once deadly guns bent upward in final irony. In the distance, the rumble of artillery merged with the endless drone of Allied aircraft. The earth itself seemed to hum with occupation. When Krause finally made his way west, joining a retreating column toward Falaise, he understood what his commanders did not. The age of the tank destroyer was ending. The next war, if there ever was one, would not be fought in hedgerows or trenches, but in the air, among clouds and contrails. He looked up once more at the sky, blue, distant, and utterly indifferent. When the smoke finally lifted over Mortain, the battlefield no longer resembled a place of battle. It looked like the aftermath of an industrial disaster. The French hedgerows, once lush and green, were flattened, scorched into black ribbons of ash. Craters pocked the landscape like open wounds, each marking the place where a rocket or bomb had found its mark. The Allied patrols who moved through the area in the days after the fighting were met with an eerie silence. The air smelled of oil, burnt rubber, and the faint, acrid tang of cordite. The summer heat made it worse, baking the wreckage until it shimmered under the afternoon Sunday. Columns of burned-out vehicles stretched for kilometers. The remains of German half-tracks, supply trucks, and tanks lay in twisted heaps, their once formidable armor now peeled like paper. Some had no visible holes, only blackened surfaces, their internal components melted by heat and blast pressure. Others were torn open as though by a giant's hand, the result of ammunition racks detonating under extreme overpressure. Many of the Jagdpanzer IVs and Panthers appeared almost untouched from a distance, silhouettes of mechanical perfection frozen in time. But up close, the truth became apparent. Concussive force had ruptured their weld seams, buckled plates, and killed their crews without a single shell penetration. The blast waves from near-miss rocket strikes had turned their interiors into ovens of compressed air and flame. Soldiers from the U.S. 30th Infantry Division, advancing through the sector, recalled scenes of horror and disbelief. "We thought we'd find tanks we'd knocked out in a fight," one private wrote home. But most of them looked like they'd just died. No holes, just burned. Inside some vehicles, The crews were still seated where they had fallen as though frozen mid-motion. The overpressure had snuffed out their lives instantly. Others had tried to escape, their bodies lying just beyond open hatches, faces down in the mud. Engineers and intelligence officers arrived soon after to study the wrecks. What they found told a story of total annihilation. Many vehicles had been destroyed not by precision, but by proximity. One P-47's rocket barrage could render an entire convoy combat ineffective even with half its shots missing. The lethal radius of the explosions turned near misses into guaranteed kills. Captured German reports revealed the growing panic that had gripped panzer divisions during those final days. Field dispatches were terse, desperate, almost fatalistic. "Movement by day is suicide," one commander wrote. "Our tank hunters can no longer hunt. We are the hunted." Another report described how entire units had begun burying their tanks in earthen pits during daylight hours, emerging only at dusk to reposition. It didn't help. Allied reconnaissance aircraft with cameras mounted under their wings photographed tracks, smoke plumes, and the telltale glint of armor beneath foliage. Within hours, Thunderbolts arrived. By mid-August, the counterattack at Mortain Operation Lüttich had collapsed completely. What had begun as Hitler's last attempt to push the Allies back to the sea ended in catastrophe. The German front disintegrated as Allied forces pushed eastward, encircling retreating units in what became the Falaise Pocket. Inside that trap were nearly 50,000 German troops, including many from the once elite Panzerjäger battalions. These were the same men who had been trained to stalk enemy armor, to outthink and outshoot their opponents with mechanical precision. Now they were broken, their equipment shattered, their confidence destroyed. When Allied reconnaissance aircraft flew over the pocket, they saw roads jammed with wreckage. Abandoned tanks littered the valleys. Smoke rose in constant pillars, visible for miles. Artillery had smashed what air power had missed. A Canadian war correspondent described it vividly. The battlefield smelled of metal and misery. The German war machine lay gutted, not beaten in battle, but burned from the sky. For survivors of the Panzerjäger units, Mortain became a scar that never faded. The experience rewired their understanding of warfare. The battlefield they had been trained for a contest of armor, tactics, and nerve no longer existed. Air superiority had rewritten the rules overnight. And for the Allied forces, it was a grim revelation of a new kind of power. The destruction they witnessed was not the result of overwhelming numbers, but of dimensional dominance, the ability to strike from above, without fear of reprisal. It was a preview of the wars to come. By late August, the fields of Normandy were quiet again, but beneath that silence lay the echoes of a new reality. In modern war, the side that owns the sky owns everything beneath it. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was never meant to be graceful. It was big, blunt, and loud, a machine that looked more like a flying engine block than a fighter. But in that rugged frame lay one of the most effective killing tools of the Second World War. To its pilots, the P-47 was affectionately known as the Jug. To its enemies, it earned another name, Der Juggernaut, the unstoppable force. Built around the massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double-wasp radial engine, the Thunderbolt could absorb punishment that would tear lesser aircraft apart. Shrapnel, flak bursts, even small caliber hits, the Jug could take them all and still bring its pilot home. Many P-47's returned from missions with half their control surfaces shredded or entire cylinders shot away, only to land safely with their engines still roaring. It wasn't elegant like the Spitfire, nor sleek like the Mustang, but it didn't need to be. The Thunderbolt's purpose was power pure, sustained, and devastating. Its rocket salvos and bombs became the final nail in the coffin of Germany's armoured divisions. Each P-47 could carry 10 5-inch HVAR rockets and up to 2 500-pound bombs. When combined with its 850 caliber Browning machine guns, it delivered more firepower than an entire platoon of tanks. From Normandy through the Ardennes and into the Rhineland, the Jug carved a fiery path across Europe. It became the Allied hammer, the weapon that shattered columns, pulverized bridges, and destroyed anything that dared to move in daylight. Pilots developed their own brutal rhythm. Dive at 300 miles per hour, fire all rockets in a single pass. Pull up hard, feel the G-forces press against your chest, then climb back into the blue while explosions rolled across the countryside below. For German ground troops, the sight of those stubby wings and roaring engines became a symbol of dread. Whenever we heard them, one captured panzer officer later said, we stopped moving. We knew if you could hear the jug, you were already dead. P-47 squadrons had fired over 1.2 million rockets, dropped more than 130,000 tons of bombs, and destroyed an estimated 6,000 armoured vehicles, along with tens of thousands of trucks, artillery pieces, and supply convoys. It was not just its firepower that made the Thunderbolt legendary, it was its endurance. Pilots trusted the jug to bring them home, even when riddled with damage. Stories spread of planes returning on one cylinder, wings shredded, canopies missing, limping back over friendly lines, oil trailing behind them like smoke from a wounded dragon. The Thunderbolt's psychological impact was enormous. For Allied troops on the ground, its presence meant protection, a symbol that the sky belonged to them. For German forces, it meant hopelessness. It was the sound of inevitability, the deep growl that preceded destruction. Even after the war, pilots who flew Mustangs and Spitfires spoke of the P-47 with respect. The Mustang might win dogfights, the Spitfire might turn tighter, but the jug ended wars. Its legacy extended far beyond the fields of Normandy. The lessons learned from its rocket strikes and close air support missions shaped the doctrine of modern air power. The concept of air supremacy, the ability to control not just the air, but the ground through it, became the foundation of every major military strategy that followed. The P-47's story is not one of beauty or elegance. It's one of endurance, strength, and transformation. It marked the end of the age of the tank hunter and the beginning of a new order where wars would no longer be decided by the thickness of armour, but by the reach of wings. By 1945, the Jagdpanzers of Mortain were nothing but rusting shells, but the roar of the Thunderbolt still echoed a reminder that in modern warfare, power came from above. The tank hunters had once ruled the battlefield. The sky hunters ended their reign. For the Jagdpanzer crews at Mortain, survival no longer depended on armour thickness, camouflage, or marksmanship. It depended on time, a sliver of 45 seconds between the first echo of an approaching engine and the inevitable strike from above. 45 seconds. That was all it took for a lifetime of training, doctrine, and experience to collapse into panic. When the roar of the P-47 Thunderbolt filled the sky, even the most hardened tank hunter felt a cold weight settle in his chest. They had faced Shermans, Cromwells, and Churchill's opponents that could be seen, tracked, and destroyed through skill. But against the Thunderbolt, there was no duel, no shot to fire, no cover thick enough to hide behind. The sound of those radial engines meant death was already on its way. In those fleeting moments, the men inside their steel coffins went through the motions, shouting orders, swinging gun barrels upward in a futile gesture, gunning their engines to move under the canopy of trees. But the math of survival was impossible. The aircraft were already in their dive, moving at 300 miles per hour, releasing rockets that covered half a kilometre in the blink of an eye. What followed was not combat, it was erasure. The air split with white trails of fire as 10 rockets descended, tearing through air and earth alike. One hit could turn a 25-ton machine into molten shrapnel. A near miss could still kill every man inside through shock and heat alone. For the crews below, the only defence was prayer whispered through clenched teeth as they waited for the sky to fall. Those 45 seconds became the measure of a dying doctrine. For decades, German Panzerjäger had built their identity on the mastery of ground-based warfare, stealth, precision, and the confidence that man and machine could overcome any threat through superior engineering. But Mortain proved that even the best-designed weapon was useless when the battlefield expanded into a new dimension. The laws of warfare had changed. Speed, altitude, and coordination now outweighed armour and calibre. A single pilot, armed with a handful of rockets and guided by radio, could do what once required an entire battalion. When the smoke cleared, the lesson was written across the French countryside in steel and ash. The age of the tank hunter had ended not because they had lost their skill or courage, but because the world had moved beyond them. The battlefield of the future would no longer be ruled by hunters stalking through hedgerows, but by aviators striking from the stratosphere. 45 seconds, that was all it took for history to turn. From that moment on, the thunder of rockets replaced the growl of engines, and the men who once hunted tanks understood too late that they were the last of their kind. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.